couple of thoughts about the water line. And the dog hears me talk. Phlebas sent me video with Malcolm and Simone entitled "The Hope Crisis: People Are Not Having Kids Because They Don't Want a Future." And they made a lot of good points. Phlebas was right. He said it's something like they talk about the meaning crisis. They're aware of Vervaeke, and of course the thing that they keep their eye on is reproduction and reproduction rates, and basically a hope crisis or something of that nature that they go into. And it's good video, about halfway through. Last week, someone at my estuary, my local estuary, mentioned a real nice piece written, let's see, what day was this? It was a Substack written by Chris Arnott. Chris Arnott, of course, is the guy who's doing a lot of walking, and he's been walking around the world, and he had a quick return to Dallas for something, and he writes about the fact that he just left Kampala, Uganda for Dallas, and he writes about the fact that anybody that he talked to in Kampala who'd get a chance to live in a Dallas suburb would be crazy not to. But he notices a quality of life in Kenya or in Uganda that it's even there in Europe, even in some developed places of Europe, that is struggling to exist in the United States. A level of community, a level of life might be harder, you might be poorer, life expectancy might be lower, but at least when you're together, and there's a level of community. And that isn't to paint sort of a romanticized, rosy-eyed picture of poverty in the world. I'd see a lot of that when work teams would come down and they'd meet Haitians. They say, "Oh, they're so happy," and it's like, yeah, they're happy sometimes, but it's actually a very difficult quality to sort of nail down and talk about. I'm continuing to think about the presentation that I'm going to give in the Northwestuary conference. We're working on sort of a teaser. Maybe it might be a live stream coming up with the speakers. They have a whole group of speakers for that conference. So it's a smallish conference. I think it's tapped off at 100. So if you don't have your tickets, you better get it quick, because I think it's almost full. But in the last video, I talked about sort of the visibility of data. And I think for human beings, most of the really important stuff about what we believe and why we believe, and the deep motivations, our happinesses, our miseries, the motivations to do or not to do, I think most of it's under the waterline. And what I mean by that is the waterline is sort of the consciousness line. And that's a disturbing thought if you think that a whole bunch of talking is going to save the world. When I think about Calvinism, when I think about the ways that Calvinism sort of punts into the will of God, I think a lot of that is connected to this water line, this consciousness line. And it's connected with combinatorial explosiveness, that the world is just too big. And when I mean the world is too big, I don't mean the circumference of the planet. I mean that life is just too deep and full and rich, and we are too small and short-lived to really sort of be able to get a grasp on everything. It's interesting walking with people through grief and watching how they grieve and watching what they do when they grieve and watching what they're sort of in control of and what they're not in control of. And we sort of rightly aspire and admire people who exhibit a high degree of mastery or control over themselves in a good way. And in some ways, the whole Jordan Peterson thing is all about, trying to gain control of your life and do something good with it. But so much of this, for the vast majority of people, is below the waterline, and it's what you do in community, and it's the quality of the communities around you. I look at how affluent, wealthy, American culture is struggling, and so much of it is because we've gotten so bad at relating to each other. We've gotten so bad. Rod Hare talked about this in this video. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just have this be a front end of the video of Rod Hare and McMo sort of go at the marriage crisis, and Tayo and a few others are there in the mix too. But it's interesting how so often it's the boundaries of deprivation, poverty, and necessity that force us beyond ourselves to actually do what we're capable of, especially when we don't want to do it. This piece by Chris Arnatti is really full of that, because when you look at how people around the world, they don't have any better options, and so they invest in each other, even if they have all these doubts about each other. And part of the reason that good marriages are so exceptional in a place like Hollywood or among the very rich is because they don't have to. And the truth is, to actually love someone well, to actually hang in there and do the right thing, to actually make a marriage work, it's hard work. And we like to sort of incentivize people and motivate people by saying, well, it'll pay off. And sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. I remember one of my seminary professors talking about this a little bit, and he was talking about the fact that sometimes you do a funeral. This isn't true for Nancy's funeral. Of course, Nancy's husband died years ago, but sometimes you do a funeral and you look at the spouse who's left behind, and sometimes they're just relieved because a long battle is over. And so people are like, well, why would you stay in a marriage like that? Well, sometimes people have reasons. It might not even be good reasons, but there might be sometimes good fruit from bad reasons. So, yeah, I think I will just sort of tack on the Rod McMo marriage crisis video, and I think so much of this is below the waterline. So, yeah, a little extra video for you. Again, I mean, I should be smart and spread it out, but so often I make a video like this, and it's like I can't wait to see what people are going to say about it. So, I can't hold it. Anyway, thanks for watching.
I've got that. He's funny and insightful.
Yeah, that's all you need to know.
Smart, very funny.
I'm more funny than smart for sure. That makes me think of, I did this in like 5th grade or something. We did this project where you put your name on a sheet of paper, and then you like pass the paper over, and your classmates write one word to kind of describe you. Ooh. And me being a little, narcissist in training, I was very excited for this, and I was really loving kind of thinking of all my classmates and writing things, and I was just couldn't wait to see what they had come up with for me.
I would be so the same way.
And
all your special qualities all listed.
Yeah, I got it back, and it was like funny, artistic, makes me laugh. And I was just like, oh no, none of these people know
not
me.
Handsome, not hot, not rich.
I would have just been sad.
Yeah.
Deeply sad. But I love that. That's one of the reasons I relate to you is, McMo, like, you have your humor, like humor and sadness, but that's all like funny people. Comedians talk about that all the time. That's outside of like theological, philosophical podcasts. That's all I listen to, basically. It's comedy podcasts. And they're all just like, we're so sad.
Well, if you gave me the option, I'd rather be happy than funny. But, we don't really, we're given the gifts we're given, I guess.
That's your cross to bear. Bye, Luke.
That's a very silly cross.
No, God bless humor, man. Because if you lose that, I mean, there are people who honestly they completely lose their sense of humor, and that is a dark, dark place.
Yeah, I have days where I feel like that. But Rod, I'm glad you're here too. I wanted to ask you if are there any updates on the intimacy crisis? I mean, I think that was where I kind of
marriage. I think that's
know you.
Yeah, that's Mark's thing. The intimacy. I think that's his term. The marriage crisis, though, I think is what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
We still have a little Twitter PM thing going, the four of us, and every once in a while, one of us will drop a video or an article in the link. We keep saying we're going to do another one, but we haven't yet. I think all of our marriages are still intact, so that's good.
Hold on, y'all. I've got to take my wife to work now. I'm gonna take off the microphone and the camera, but I'm still here.
Okay.
That's fine. I'm here.
Yeah, this is. It makes me nervous. Thank you, thank you, Ty. Like I'm not exactly a virgin on live streams, but I'm almost a virgin on live streams. So I need all the support.
Are there plans to make more videos regarding the marriage crisis?
I think it's one of those things where we assume we will do it again, but we're all kind of, first of all, Catherine and Eamon are, they had a house full of teenagers. I think they're getting ready to send their oldest off to college, and we all know Paul's schedule. So I'm probably the one who's the most flexible in terms of like, sure, you want to do another one? Just get caught up. So I assume we'll do one at some point. I think we started to say a lot of the same things. I would be the one that would bring like, I don't know, guys, I'm worried. I'm not sure that marriage is going to make it, and then they would, talk me off the ledge. And so I think, probably the most fruitful thing we could do is get more personal, which is way harder to do on the internet. As Paul often says, it's easy to talk about, like celebrities' marriage or something like, but the marriages he actually knows about, his own and his parishioners, like you can't really talk about it, right? And so in some ways, I think that's one of the ways it makes it kind of the dark forest. Like you can't really go in there, like, because no one will really tell you what's going on. And even the people who have great marriages aren't really, they're not really talking about it either. So it's a hard subject to talk at the level of depth that it actually deserves.
Is there as I remember, Chad and a few others, I think Gavin's had a conversation with his wife as one of those, the live streams that he did.
Those are great.
Speaking of, I miss Gavin. Where is Gavin?
Yeah.
But there's I guess my question is, would it be more helpful to have those conversations if there were more sort of couples online? Cassidy and Ferdy had a video drop yesterday for those.
Yeah, I haven't watched that one yet. I was glad to see that they did it, but I don't know what they talked about. But yeah, I think again, what makes marriage so difficult and complicated is the stuff that would be the most useful to talk about, but it's also the hard. It's kind of like, expectant mothers, and the way you talk to expectant mothers about childbirth, particularly if it's their first. It's like, well, how do you talk about it? And what you want to do is you want to encourage them and exhort them and inspire them, right? Because they're about to face something very challenging, but also very rewarding. I mean, marriage is kind of like that too, right? It's like if you kind of want to talk about all the ways that marriage can be a real crucible. And I think it was inspired to think about marriage as a sacrament, frankly, because it's probably the right level. Maybe it's a little too high for some people, but it should be up there somewhere in terms of a kind of ultimate test and a real crucible for most people. And so all the things that make it difficult, you don't want to turn people off of marriage, but talking about it would probably actually be fruitful. It's just very difficult to do because these are people's actual lives, right?
I don't know if I was turned off by marriage. I guess to a certain extent I was, by discovering what Paul said about it and how it's meant to be a fractal representation of God's love for people. And I was like, that seems like a cross too big to bear. That's
yeah.
I don't have the shoulders for that.
Yeah, it's hard enough already. Like I gave Paul a little bit of a hard time on some of ours. Where it's like, you're really selling it well here. It's like I kind of understand the impulse to romanticize it. I mean, we have multiple generations raised on Disney fantasies about, that's the rom-com, right? And well, at least I had a whole lot of people thinking that marriage was great, but it also left them almost completely unprepared for what it actually takes to be in a relationship, right? I had this experience many times when I was dating, where I would encounter women who had a pretty clear idea of what they were looking for in a man, but had almost no idea what they were looking for in a relationship. And and so, you know, the sort of Disneyfication of the institution probably in the long run didn't serve us all that well, even if it made people a little more motivated to actually take it on. Yeah, thanks, Phlebas.
Phlebas is the expert on marriage.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the institution, by the way, and my own as well. Like, not just in the abstract. I think it's a wonderful thing that everybody should try at least once.
Should everybody try at least once? Because that's one of my sticking points with this little corner. Marriage is touted as a bit of like the cure for all life illness, similar to our community is touted.
So
And I'm
this
like,
is
should everyone get married? Is that
that trap of talking about things as ideals and then thinking about all the particulars that may be exceptions to that ideal. I think for most people, yeah, if you take the arc of a life, how long life is, you know, you're going to want to take it on with someone else. And
well, my wife's gone, so I can talk about it now.
I love it.
She listened in for a second, and she had a really good insight. She said, I wish people tried on the emotional aspect of relationships like they do the sexual aspect. You know, and I was like, well, you know, that's kind of what dating used to be, you know, like especially in, you know, when most people thought that sex before marriage was a sin. But then there's also an aspect, we were talking about it, like it is really difficult. We feel both of us feel very grateful and feel like we kind of, you know, we're blessed by God, lucked out, you know, we put it in different terms depending on who we're talking to, but very fortunate to have found each other when we did and how we did. Because I think that a lot of the Disney stuff was never an option for us because we were friends first. And we became friends basically at the bottom of a pit, you know, and like, so our whole relationship in some ways has been trauma bonding. Because life just always gives you more stuff to, you know, grieve, learn from, grow from. But I do think that, like, yeah, that process of going from the idealized, so we idealize our partners when we first meet them, right? Because that's our bodies basically telling us to make babies with them as soon as possible. And we overlook lots of stuff. And then you have the quote unquote honeymoon phase where you kind of slowly start realizing those pieces that are unfortunate. But like I said, because we were close friends beforehand, we had pretty much already forgiven each other for the worst things about each other. And I don't mean like sin, like or like, you know, arguments or anything like that. I mean like the fundamental brokenness that was obvious to us in each other. You know, me being able to see her kind of fundamental flaws and her seeing mine. That was so yeah, that was where the story began. And so there's so much that has happened in the last 10 years. We've been together for 10 years, married for 8. And so we were pretty young getting together, but it's been like being in a foxhole because we've just seen marriages to the left and to the right just, you know, get completely decimated. And decimated in a way that from an outside perspective, it not all of those relationships needed to end, we'll say. And then I think that a lot of them could have suffered together and they could still be together today. But yeah, it really is like, well, this is why I asked you originally, Rod, because I too have a sense that, you know, marriages and relationships are in really rough shape. And that people are really struggling out there. And I think one of the things that I've seen people struggle with is just how hard it can be. And so I think that goes to a little bit of what Paul's talking about. And when you first said Paul, I thought you were talking about the Apostle Paul. He was the original one.
That happens around here. I got to remember, I'm talking to Christians.
right. That's right.
I like aphorisms. Like a really good one is love is unconditional, relationships are not. So if one of the first things you could do is disabuse people of this idea of unconditional love, like you're supposed to love me unconditionally. Like, well, that isn't at all realistic, right? So now the thing is, if you make the conditions overt, you ruin it, right? These conditions, they're somewhere underneath the surface, and it's better if most of them are just understood, right? Which goes to my next point, which is roles. There's something called a husband. There's something called a wife, and I'm gonna romanticize about the halcyon days of the past. Sorry, but there was a time when we knew what that meant. We knew what a husband was. We knew what a wife was, right? And if you asked any parent who isn't, say in a faith tradition, if your job as a parent is to raise your child to be a good wife or to be a good husband, how many modern parents would recoil in horror at the prospect, right? But the reality is that if you were a young man in search of a wife, or you were a young woman in search of a husband, you pretty much knew approximately what that meant, and you pretty much knew approximately what you were going to get. And now what we have is you have these two people who are brought together by, the forces that do that, like to your point, McMo, right? And suddenly now you're in a relationship. You have the next idea as to what you deserve from that person, what they're entitled to, what you're entitled to. And so essentially everybody's a free agent. Everybody's making their own best deal possible. There's no union left to represent you, right?
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting because I tend to, I think maybe it's too strong to say I disagree with you, but I think I would flip the importance of those two things. Like me and my wife, we believe in the unconditional love, probably more so than the roles. And some of that is because of like I said, we kind of started with a lot of conditions, like the conditions were on the table. And in a lot of ways that allowed us to say, okay, we love each other. And that love is a commitment, regardless of the conditions. And then because we grew up in, we were part of a big kind of evangelical megachurch at the time. The idea of biblical gender roles, for this particular church was probably an idol. It was kind of branching on the thing that, like, the type of thing that if your wrist went limp, and an elder caught you, you might get a talking to, like, we need masculine men, So we come from this context where those roles were overemphasized, and the unconditional nature of the type of love that's required for a lifelong relationship.
But you still had them, but you did still have them, even if they were too rigid. You did still have them,
right? Well, and that's the thing too, is like, me and my wife talked a lot about this because it might sound silly to some people, but it actually took a lot of figuring out, because I, at the time, and still to this day, was a very sensitive and, you could call, feminine type of guy in some ways, cry at movies, cry in church, like talking about my feelings, that kind of thing. And my wife was a very masculine.
I don't accept the premise that that's feminine, but go on.
Right. Well, yeah, and me neither. But at the time, that was kind of, that was the context. And my wife is brash and even less polite and more disagreeable than me, if you could believe that. So she's no wallflower, and so this seemed kind of like the opposite of what our church kind of would have wanted. There were some questions on whether or not I would be able to lead her, and so we, of course, thought that kind of no roles, total equal 50-50 was something to kind of strive towards. But it wasn't long until we found out that it's not 50-50, and it's not even necessarily roles as much as there's things I'm better at. And some of the reasons I'm better at them is because of my genetics, and my gender, we'll say. And then there's some things that she's better at, and a lot of those are because of who she is. And so it's not like we didn't try to take the roles and turn them into molds, and have to confine completely to this idea abstracted from what a husband is and what a wife is. It was more so this kind of process of us both trying our best to give 100% and seeing where her 100% was more useful and my 100% was more useful. You know, like it and some of that also got complicated later on when she got sick. And so, yeah, then it was like, no, there are no gender roles. You know, McMo is cooking, cleaning, you know, taking care of the pets and going out to the 9 to 5. And the woman's role is to rest in bed. And so, yeah, I hear you on that, but I wondered, what do you think about, well, first, it makes me sad that you don't believe in unconditional love. But what are your thoughts on that, and like specifically the gender roles or whatever?
Remember what I said. Love is unconditional. Relationships are not. Right? It's a
well, I
pretty
took the
important
bait
distinction.
and I totally misunderstood you.
I mean, of course, you know, now we're going to define love. But, you know, depending on how you're using that word, you know, the feeling, that whatever that is, you know, that thing, right? You know, some have said in the face of your lover, you see the face of God, you know, like however you're thinking about and talking about that word, I'm assuming that moves on the waters in its own way, and it defies condition. But as soon as you're in relationship with somebody and you're splitting the rent with them, you know, you're sharing a sink with them, you know, right? Well, now there's all kinds of conditions, and all you got to do is just start violating a few of them, and you will quickly discover that there are conditions. And as I said earlier, on the other hand, if you try to make the conditions overt, well, let's just get these things, you know, on paper. That's called a prenup, right? Go ahead, like try to just make your relationship work by putting all the propositions down. You know, no more than 40 pounds, right? Like we agree, right? You know, how many times a week we agree, right? Like try to bind your partner to any set of rules that they, you know, agree to ahead of time, and you will quickly find out how making conditions overt doesn't work either, right? So you're in this liminal space between, there are definitely conditions, but now you're having to try to navigate those. And the point I was trying to make is that without some kind of social norms or roles or something, then you're literally making it up as you go along. And even your story, you know, it sounds like you were in a position where you had such rigid roles that you could then rebel against those roles and define something that worked better for the two of you, which is which is fantastic, obviously, right? That's what you want. Yeah. And PVK will make the point a lot that, you know, every marriage is like a foreign country, right? It's like, each one is its own thing. So, but being able to have some kind of basic protocol that at least gets you started down that path, I think we have largely lost that. That's, in some ways, that is, I would argue that the tectonic plates that are shifting under our feet are really the misalignment of interest between men and women, the short-term and long-term interests. And if everybody plays the game to what they perceive to be in their best interest, you end up with these two things just gradually drifting apart, because your interests in the next month or year are not the same as what they will be in a decade or more. And people are playing asymmetrical games with each other and essentially using each other. And as I said, I think on one of our marriage crisis conversations, we've essentially normalized heartbreak as if, like, well, that's just part of growing up. It's like, well, think again, right? Like, there's some people who just simply don't recover. And I don't think we take it nearly seriously enough that almost every civilization has in one way or another found ways to constrain the unfettered exploitation of the sexes. You know, if you just allow them to exploit each other, very, very bad things happen. There's a whole category of people who just simply get spit out of that and never recover from it.
Yeah, and there's the category of people who, you know, I think I was talking to somebody about this the other day, maybe yesterday. But there's a category of people now, like, you know, think of the ex-evangelical kind of the people who have left the church, the deconstructed types. I know from experience and from knowing a lot of them, not all of the ones, knowing a lot of the ones that exist, but a lot of the people I know are like this. there is this felt sense, I guess, that they missed out on the type of sexual and romantic adventures that they saw in media. And so there's this weird thing where they're like, you know, it's these childless women in their 30s and these jobless men in their 30s kind of LARPing as college kids again. And making like mistakes that, you know, secular, the people who actually made had those adventures, we'll say, learned how crummy and how, you know, shitty it feels to use and to be used. And it's just a weird thing. But yeah, forgive me for misunderstanding you earlier too.
No, it's fine. Guilty here, because I was married very young, a 10-year marriage that I left in my early 30s, and I did that. You know, I spent my 30s and a lot of my 40s being, you know, an eligible bachelor, I suppose, and learned a lot of things. Not proud of all of them, but yeah, it's hard to have an opinion. Man, I didn't want Tayo to leave because he was trying to get us to talk.
I'm still here.
I wanted to, because you raised a valuable question about should it be the ideal, and I might have dismissed it, you know, by saying, well, you know, particulars and ideals. But was there more behind that question?
Yes, but I think the line you guys are going down will circle back onto what it is I was trying to say. But I'm just making sure no one's trying to troll. There's someone backstage without a camera on, so that's what I'm dealing with at the moment.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, that brings up things for me. The idea of should it be the ideal? Well, because I think that kind of another one of those things that's a little bit below the surface here. And you said it quoting PVK, every relationship is a foreign country. Well, and that's because every single individual is unique, you know, and so when we're talking about one unique individual finding another unique individual, it's very difficult to have like a textbook or a manual, you know. This is not a 6-cylinder engine where if you tune everything just right,
you'll try this. No, I get what you're saying, but try this. Turn that idea and flip it around on its side, maybe just flip it completely, right? And there is nothing that you have the right to expect from another person. Like literally everything should be negotiated from the bottom up. If you will pretty quickly discover if you are, you know, engaging the opposite sex with the hope of something like a mutually, well, actually, not even the opposite sex. I think the opposite sex introduces specific complexities that perhaps same-sex relationships don't have, and probably vice versa. But if you're trying to have a mutually rewarding relationship with someone from the opposite sex, you're very quickly going to encounter a whole series of assumptions and covert contracts and surprises and trapdoors and minefields, right? And if you don't have at least some baseline of mutual understanding as to what is reasonable to expect from each other, you really are starting from scratch, and that is a lot to ask.
Maybe that's what's confusing me, because the way that you described all of those individual expectations, to me, those are hard to distinguish from the interpretation of those gender roles. You know, like those to me seem like a very like of a piece of the type of you know, the type of thing where I expect, like we have friends who just recently the man was unemployed for a good long time. The wife found that at first unattractive and eventually to some degree unacceptable. And so, but these were culturally urban monoculture people, you know, that was supposed to be, you know, we're a new type of family. The woman's going to win the bread. The man's going to be an artist, kind of a thing. But just kind of biologically or culturally or for whatever reason, that setup was not good. You know, it was unacceptable. And so I think of something like that as like, I don't know. Do you get my question? Like, I guess I'm the way that you were just describing those kind of expectations that you might bring to a relationship. To me, that sounds very similar to bringing in the expectations that gender roles or, you know, relational roles kind of bring. And I understand too that that's like a, on the one hand, it's nice to have a standard, you know, and if the whole culture agreed that this was a woman and this was a man and this is what a wife does and this is what a husband does, and we're all kind of playing the same game, you know, and like you said, we can get up in the morning and we know kind of what we need to do. But those are also the self-same things that when why do I keep using self-same? I don't know. Those are the same things that basically, to me, that's a very similar thing as bringing in expectations of equality, or, you know, what's the word? Not complementarian, but egalitarianism, you know, like I think that to some extent, and this is why I would want to, you know, center that kind of unconditional love maybe as the ideal, not only in a marriage, but also in a life, because that's kind of what it takes to not only deal with people not meeting your expectations, but deal with you not meeting theirs.
Well, it's definitely the glue that binds you together and motivates you to keep trying. But I guess what I'm saying is I think it's insufficient. You know, is essentially what I'm getting at. I think it's a necessary but insufficient condition. You must love each other, yes, but you also must have relatively mature approaches to how to relate to another human being in a way that's mutually satisfying. And where do you learn to do that if it's not through a formation process? And, you know, partly, McMo, growing up where you did versus where I did, I grew up in Southern California in the 70s. Like, I went to elementary school with kids who were growing up in communes. Like, I would visit, you know, friends who were living in a commune. And, you know, a lot of the hippie culture and the hot tub culture literally sprouted in where I grew up. So I knew these people, right? And so I saw kind of like what Burn Power talks about, right? Like he's a little older, but he was there as a young adult and seeing the Haight-Ashbury district in San Francisco and the things that were happening. And so I'm much more familiar with people who've grown up with no religious traditions whatsoever. They would be completely lost in, you know, any of the kind of conversations that we're having. At least, you know, I grew up reading the Bible, so I'm literate. I know the references, I know the stories, and I can keep up. But if you don't have any of those traditions, I'm just trying to have, you know, a little bit of credibility with you Christian folks. So some of what you're hearing from me is, you know, way out there on the left coast, watching people literally try to make it up as they go along and see how lost so many people get. And so it's informed by that. And even as you tell your story, you are definitely nested in a tradition that at least gave you something to reject, right? There was something to at least start with. And there are so many people where they don't have any of that. Basically, they have what, you know, the equivalent of what TikTok would tell them today they deserve from a man or from a woman.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rough. This is something I thought about, not just like in other places in life too, which is it's kind of like the idea is like, do you need to know the law? Like, do you need to know the 10 Commandments before you can accept Jesus into your heart, kind of a thing, you know? And obviously this is totally out of left field, but it seems like a similar thing where it's like,
is this where the altar call comes, McMillan?
Yeah. Rod, repent and believe. But there is a weird sense in which, like, because I was brought up with the Bible and in a religious culture, I kind of know. I don't know. It's hard because and it's a big argument in like Christian evangelical spheres, I guess, or maybe not even an argument, but just different strokes for different folks. But like the idea of like, do you need to give the bad news before you give the good news? And so in this situation, that would be something like, the bad news is there is an ideal husband and an ideal wife, and you're nowhere near it, and you never will be. But like here's, you know, like here's what an ideal husband looks like, and then that'll be bad news because any husband who hears it will know immediately, you know, that he falls short or whatever. But yeah, like that's where that becomes a sticking point is, like you said, like There's plenty of people still getting married, quote unquote. There's still plenty of people pair bonding, mating, and it's like how, and they're just hurting one another at the end of the day. Like that's all that's happening, in the grand scheme of things. Um,
Um,
Go ahead.
no, I was just anding. That is what's going on.
And using each other.
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
Tyler, are you pair bonded?
No, no, I am not. I'm in the streets, as the kids say.
Somebody said you were
Is that what
married.
they say? That's interesting.
Mark, I wanted to bring you in. I think you're unmuted for a second.
Hey, how's it going?
Well, thanks. How are you doing?
Good, good. Just, listen to the bros talk about marriage,
Hell yeah,
Yeah, it's
brother.
a great topic. Um, I just was, I was thinking about, um, like, I don't know what it was, but maybe 2 weeks ago, there was kind of this meme that was going around, and I saw it on Twitter and I saw it on YouTube, where it's like, your wife is not your best friend, like this thing, like, people say their spouse is their best friend. It's not supposed to be your best friend. It's a relationship, and and it's like from some like orthodox guy, saying that this is, there's a hierarchy and you're blah blah blah. And so I started like I'll just hear things and not really consciously process them and just be like, oh, I think my wife's my best friend. That's messed up, Shouldn't be that way, you know. Like what there's something wrong. And I started thinking maybe I should like, start trying to make the relationship different than a friendship. And then it just occurred to me like, why the hell do I just pick up these ideas from people, Like it's like I'm glad she's my best friend,
Seriously. I mean,
Like she's a really good friend.
yeah,
Like
praise God.
like I don't like
Imagine.
these things just like gain steam. And like I get there's some truth to that, like I don't treat my wife like a guy, but it's like, yeah, she's my best friend, and I'm glad. So
I'm guessing, like, I don't know what generation you are, Mark. First of all,
41.
Yeah, praise God, right? Like, good for
Yeah.
you that your wife is your best friend, right? That's awesome, right? And the antidote to all this stuff is like you're actually doing it and it's working, right? And of course, you probably notice the same thing that anybody hearing it would notice. Well, there's a grain of truth in there, right? Because a lot of guys who maybe are a generation younger, when they think of their best friend, they have a whole bunch of assumptions about what that means. And, on the second or third date, they're crying about, their mean boss and, getting emotional and leaking all over the place. And they don't understand why she's suddenly no longer attracted to them. And, right. So it's like the negotiation of what we mean by your best friend with a role already in mind, right? She's a woman, you're a man, you already recognize the differences versus someone where you might as well be talking about someone from another. Remember that book, Mars and Venus? Remember that from the 90s, right?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
It was like a huge book in the 90s. I mean, if you went back and read it now, it would just be ridiculously overly simplified, right? But they were onto something, right? Anyway, I do think that those, all of the history of culture and social norms and customs and rituals were all, a response to this dilemma, right? It turns out that, finding ways to kind of ritualize the way men and women find each other, where they can at least know something about what to expect from each other, really facilitates the process.
Yeah, that sounds. The only time I've heard of the your wife shouldn't be your friend thing was in the easier to speak about celebrity marriages. The Smiths, Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith. I think
yeah.
LOL.
before
the model marriage for us all.
Exactly. So doesn't sound like great advice. I also wanted to bring in Sherry's question, but Emily was secondly what I think McMurray was noticing as well, that the number of deconstructed friends that are now trying open marriages and having this wild affairs. And Sherry's question was, how much have Christian stereotypes destroyed Christian marriages?
Yeah, I think this is what McMullen was referring to, right? Like, the idea that someone would stand at a pulpit, maybe who isn't married, or maybe who doesn't have much of a marriage himself or herself, lecturing everyone about how to be married, I could see why that would fall flat for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that the autistic answer is literally 0. Marriages have been ruined by Christian stereotypes. Marriages are ruined by the people within them, not abstract ideas. But that's not what she's getting at.
Yeah.
Because I do think that it's always like the relationship to the stereotype more than the stereotype, right? It's either over believing or being blind to the truth of the stereotype. And so, yeah, I don't know.
What are some of the truths of the stereotype that you could be blind to? Touch
That in general, things like lust and monogamy are not just kind of like prudish concepts used to control people. It's like, it's actually like, to Emily's point as well, like, look at all the people who do polyamory. Watch the life go from their eyes when they describe their partner's partner. It does not take FBI level body language analysis to see what's going on. But then also things like keeping your purity till marriage, like not having sex before you're married, is like low key. Probably it's better kind of utilitarian it's better in a utilitarian way than it is in a spiritual way. Because if you successfully do it, you basically are ratcheting up the tension, and the release is amazing. But
and if you were the village elder, if you could get all the young people to agree to those terms, you'd have a much more stable village.
Yes. And there's a whole lot of studies now that show the kinds of chemicals that rush our bodies, especially when we're young, before, during, and after sexual experiences. And so all of that, to me, I'm like, yeah, actually that's pretty good stuff. And it was kind of along the lines of what my wife was saying too, which is a bunch of people are looking for an idea called sexual compatibility, which I still have yet to hear anybody give me a really good definition of that. It's like, it's basically like trying to describe two basketball players that are really good together, or two jazz musicians who just, like.
Well, probably the only person that I've ever heard of that probably had sexual compatibility was like Genghis Khan. Because he could just like.
We're not asking the ladies about that.
I think that would be called forced compatibility.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the only true. I don't know.
But the shadow side of that same point is something like lie back and try not to think about where she learned to do that.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I mean. Like but then on the reverse side too, I think there's also, it's a stereotype of like, I don't know. What was the original question? What's the truth of the stereotype? Was that what you asked?
Mm-hmm. And yeah, you gave a couple good answers about what can be seen as prudish, the keeping no sex before marriage, dogma, is actually a useful stereotype that can be, if you see it can be useful.
Another useful one that I would put on the table is mutual submission, which is weird to talk about after we just talked about sex.
Oh no.
But I just mean in terms of outdoing one another in showing love. Like in so many things, if you just took a description of the Christian idea of something and repackaged it as some guru's, maybe you call yourself Porton Jeterson, and you take these scriptural truths and you put them in the psychological lens, and people will be amazed, like the wisdom, and you could come up with rules for life. Yes, Sherry. I feel way uncomfortable saying things that Sherry feels totally comfortable saying. But yeah, like that mutual submission, but yeah, I think that it's just one of those things where the Bible seems to, true biblicism has yet to be tried. Like communism.
Chad,
Yeah.
I was just thinking of like I'm listening to this this historical book about people who lived in the 1850s and 1840s and like these luxuries that we have are crazy. The luxury to be able to pick and choose what we want to do because we're so idealistic that like I don't know. It's crazy. It's just crazy. I don't have a lot of valuable things to say.
Things like running water and internal plumbing.
Things like there's one of these people in this book he and his wife had 16 children, and 8 of them died, and that was normal. Like that's insane. Like, and to think about like we could like even just we have the power to choose today whether we will or won't have, like we could just like I don't know. It's just crazy. It's we've gotten so far away from we've manifested so much that it's hard to imagine that we should choose I don't know. I'm not making any sense. I can see how I'm making sense, but I'm sure I'm not making any sense. Young God, come on here and show us what you got, buddy.
no, do not come up and show us what you got.
Anyway,
Hands where we can see him, young God.
We have to. We have to protect.
I really just wanted to say hello. I saw Mark is on. Mark is my favorite person in the corner, just so you guys know. But that's because I.
Oh yeah, dude.
Mark is real life friends with Chad, so
all
of us are envious.
I'm good in real life. I'm probably the worst person in the corner, but I don't know.
That's true.
I'm fucking so great in real life. I'm the best. I suck on the internet, but I'm telling you, if you ever meet me in real life, you're gonna be so impressed.
I'll see you at Denny's later, hey?
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
I really like that. I really like that comment from Emily Tayo, because I think that it actually, like, what are the chances that's going to be good the first time? Well,
I was going to answer that. That's why I brought up. For women, almost 0%. For men, 100%.
Yep.
Yeah, but dude, here's the
ahead.
thing. Like when I was on so-called dating sites, right? Like OkCupid, Go Fish, all these stupid dating sites. Like they weren't dating. Nobody that I ever encountered on there was actually interested in dating. They were only interested in hooking up, and they were also the ones who were instigating this kind of behavior. So I wasn't the only one, right? And so it's weird that and I think it has to do with everybody knows it's going to be a damn mess. It's like, but we like to gamble. Maybe this time it'll be different. And so it's not about like our actual experience. It's about this egotistic way of thinking that we can how do I almost like we have this godlike power. Watch me try again. You know, it's kind of weird. I'm not making sense.
Yeah.
Well,
go ahead.
No, go ahead, McCall.
The line I was thinking on was more so that, like, what is 100% successful in those situations is doing exactly what feels right in the moment. And that's kind of the, and obviously it's never that simple. It's always more complex. The guy's thinking
Yeah.
things, the woman is thinking things, but like what's actually, they're not successfully accomplishing making love, they are successfully maybe 50% accomplishing sex. But there's a sense in which if that's what it were about, then they would be satisfied, right? But it's not.
Yeah, but exactly. It's because it's not. I can't remember a single one of those times where I was ever at ease. I was always very nervous. I was overthinking. I wasn't really connected with somebody. I was more kind of distracted by the reality of the situation that there's something off here that I can't really explain what it is. And perhaps maybe that's just because I'm a feeble simp, but I don't think that's true. The men who are out there who think that they're going to play this game, like I just I'm trying to think of the lives that they have. Is that a life that I would want? Like, good grief! Like the
Well,
kinds of lies that you have to continually pile up and pile up and pile up to believe the shit that you're swimming in. It's ridiculous. I gotta go.
so
Bye.
Bye,
so
Chad.
Chad has just described a modern day mating ritual, right? That's what most people are left with, and this is kind of the same dilemma I encountered when we were doing our little series. Is like, notice where we have kind of ended up. If you talk about it, if you analyze it objectively, let's say, or try to, you end up seeing a whole lot of structural problems with this institution we call marriage. And I think I used this analogy on one of our conversations about this. I live in a historic neighborhood where a few years ago, what was happening is all these sort of quaint historic houses that were too small for modern day sensibilities were getting knocked down, and these horrific tall, they call them tall skinnies, right? Just if you drive around Nashville, you'll see a number of them. And so this particular neighborhood rallied and implemented what they called a historic overlay, which is basically, in this particular neighborhood, there's a bunch of things you can't do, right? You gotta preserve anything that's considered historic, and roof heights and all that kind of stuff, right? And I started thinking about marriage as kind of an imperfect solution to an unsolvable problem. If you just try to solve this problem, if you're a guy, you have an approach which is just absolutely not going to work with your counterparty, and if she has an approach, probably not going to work for you. If something like mutual satisfaction is the goal, without some intervening outside force, you're going to really struggle. Not everyone, right? If you're high in agreeableness, you're probably going to have an easier time of it than if you're not, right? And if you're sort of securely attached, it's going to be a lot easier for you than if you're not, and so forth, right? If you have relatively stable mental health and so forth. But the point is, for a whole lot of people, to just with nobody backing them up, they basically the only leverage they have is they can leave. That's it. That's the only leverage you have. Is if I'm not getting what I want, I'm out, right?
It's not the only leverage. You can also make the other person's life miserable.
Well, good point. No, good point. Yeah, good point. So this idea of an overlay, which is how I started thinking about marriage, is you can almost see how it evolved. We just can't let people just hook up with whoever they want to. We have all the boys in the
we live in a society
are killing each other over this one girl, and right, and so you can almost see how it would be adaptive culturally, and it makes a lot of sense. The question now is, without some outside force intervening and essentially acting as a forcing function, how do you put it back together? And
you can see some of the complications with what's the guy's name, Homath. He takes the approach, and I think it's probably the right approach, that it kind of, if you kind of look at the quartiles of attractiveness and show how the top 10% of men are going to get the top 50% of women, or have access to the top 50% of women, or something like that. But the top 80% of women are all after that top 10% of men. There's some mathematical discrepancies. And so, yeah, exactly what you're saying. When you look at it on paper, and the paper of a spreadsheet, maybe, rather than the paper of a novel, you start seeing all, like you're saying, these structural problems. But then I do think that there's a sense in which it's kind of like being a vampire, right? Like in the sense that you can't know what it's like to be a vampire until you've been bitten and you have the thirst for blood. To be in a healthy relationship is really difficult to explain to other people, even though you can. It's really easy to explain it in a way that will get people to give you money. And so this is the charlatan problem, basically, where you've got these relationship experts who will talk about things like attachment. They'll talk about, expectation setting and all of this stuff. But for the, for the lonely person out there who really is just, they want to experience love, romantic love, and they want to experience lifelong partnership. They want the commitment, the security, the safety. They want to be, either they want to have the relationship that their parents had, or they want to have the relationship that their parents could have had or should have had. And so it's an inescapable problem because this is where babies come from. Like we all come from this thing. But it's also this huge
not marriage,
distractor.
To be clear,
Right. Well, that's the point, right? Like it's this. I think I just made a new term, a distractor beam. Like sex is this big distractor beam in regards to relationship. And I think that most happily married men will tell you there are seasons of celibacy, even in marriage, and so that was one of the lies that was told to people in purity culture was, you save yourself for marriage, and then you get married, and it's all systems go, have as many babies as possible, have as much fun as possible. This is what the Lord has in store for you, if only you can get down the altar. And so that's another aspect of when marriages happen and sex issues start occurring, and sex issues are legion, and it is stuff that's like, it's usually stuff that's not the average stereotype, right? It's somebody's not feeling good about themselves, or somebody's having problems trusting that the other one actually does love them and is attracted to them. These are kind of the very difficult, heart-wrenching, like thinking about all the times I've cried after sex. My wife rubbing my back. It's okay, buddy. Yeah.
God bless you. Well, yeah.
But like, this is back to what Liv, my wife, said when she was just popped on. Like this is why I love my wife. She's like twice as smart as me, and doesn't need to ramble for days to be clear. But yeah, the idea of that emotional training, which one would hope they'd get in their family, right? Like you learn to interact with others first in the family. It's not just that we've got sex totally screwed up and at the top of our kind of desire hierarchy. It's also that we lack the emotional skills, and look at the rise of autism, and I'm speaking specifically in our chat down there. But there's serious issues when it comes to reading emotions, and this is a problem for a lot of men anyway. But just the ability to kind of understand what someone's feeling, the fact that women don't always say what they mean, the fact that men don't always say what they mean. There's all these kind of these intense relationships, or these pair bondings, become the locus of basically everything that's wrong with all of us. And it's kind of the first line of defense for keeping what's wrong with us from escaping out into the broader community, right? Like that's kind of one of the purposes of marriage, is to keep
all kinds of havoc.
To keep those things constrained. And so it's a two-pronged problem in the sense that we can't have good marriages because the marriages we have aren't good, and people don't want to get married because they look at all the bad marriages and say, why would I want that?
Well, where I ended up the last time I think we talked about this on that series is I ended up at something like virtue, being marriageable, clean your room, right? Like the best we can hope for is each person individually takes upon themselves. We're like, well, what kind of person am I trying to attract? And I'm going to try to be that kind of person, and then go looking for someone who's doing the same thing. That's, in a sense, that's the most redemptive thing I can think of for the moment we find ourselves in, until there is some other cultural forces that sort of get people back together again and liking each other again. And or I'll use the flipped magnet metaphor a lot. Like, there's lots of things causing us to snap together, right, to be attracted to each other. But there's something that happened culturally where the magnet got flipped, and now we're repelling each other. There's so many cases where men and women just don't like each other anymore, and that's just really, really tragic for the culture. I am going to have to jump off, but I wanted to, McMo did a better job. You're actually married, and I'm married too. Mark he's married. Like you've done a good job of actually advocating for marriage on this, and I think that's really important that people should do. I am also married, and happily so. Like, I don't say enough nice things about the institution. I probably should do a better job of advocating for it myself. It's more just sort of surveying the landscape and worrying about all the others, right? Is where I'm coming from a lot on these topics.
Give it up, Parlato. Give up your hope, Parlato. You'll never have a healthy marriage. I'm just kidding.
Well, I think it's a great question. Like, what's a good marriage?
Well, if your wife is your best friend, you're doing great, man.
Yep.
Yeah, but some of my friends don't even like me, so I don't know what.
As long as she would describe you the same way, you guys are doing all right.
Well, that's what she told me, but yeah, we're doing pretty good, I think. But it's like we've been reading through Genesis, and so we're like with Abraham right now, and so it kind of struck me, like, so did Abraham have a good marriage? Because it seems like they had so many problems, like they were like Sarah was constantly like getting abducted by these people because Abraham was lying about her, and sleeping with his maids. It's like, I don't know. Did they have a good marriage? Probably not by today's standards. Like, not by Instagram standards. Of like, I know people. I know people who are like influencers. Like Christian relationship experts, and they got some good pictures on Instagram. But I've read some of their texts, and it's not the stuff that's on Instagram.
Yeah,
it's pretty bad.
One of the real gems in PVK's archives, go way back, is when he did the whole thing on the sexual ethics of the Old Testament. It's like one of his best. He got pretty salty in that one, and it highlights.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, very few people say they want a marriage like what is it, Hosea and what's her name? But yeah, all it takes to be in a good relationship these days is to be photogenic. Like, people will think that you've got it made if you can take a good photo with your partner. So yeah,
that's why I have a picture, so you won't have to photogenic.
An absolute pleasure. I love spending some time with you guys, and nice to overlap with you, Tayo, finally. And I'll see you on the next one.
Yeah, see you around, Rob.
Have a good one.
Bye bye.